what are the things that we can do to take care of our physical body right here, right now, that really don't cost us anything? There are three things that I think of that are very, very important. First and foremost, hydration, right? Our entire body is 70%, if not more, water, right? And if we are chronically dehydrated, all metabolic things do not work well. Number two, fiber, right? Fiber in your diet. Fiber helps bind to cholesterol, helps bind to estrogen and estrogen-like toxins coming out in the gut. Fiber also helps improve insulin resistance, blood sugar control. The last thing is get physical movement. And women benefit from intensity and short duration. That gives you a place for your stress chemistry to burn off. Our body is an animal. It doesn't know that you're on your 8th Zoom call for the day, right? It just knows my chemistry is showing me stress. Give it a physical outlet.
Welcome. I'm Amrita, and this is the Amrita Effect. Real conversations about identity, resilience, and becoming for women in the middle of figuring themselves out or finding their way back to who they really are. This episode is made possible with the support from the following sponsors. Fabio Gula at Luminant Bank. If you're thinking about buying or refinancing, Fabio offers over 35 years of experience and helps match you with the right loan, not just a one-size-fits-all. And Tyler McBroom at TRM CPA. They are a proactive CPA company helping business owners maximize profits and pay as little tax as legally possible. Main Street Title. They deliver your title on time, every time. And last but not least, Lauren DiCarlo at Zingarli and DiCarlo. If you have any real estate transactions for buying or selling, reach out to them for representation. I'm so excited to introduce our guest today, Dr. Betty Murray, who is a functional medicine expert, nutritionist, and a women's health researcher specializing in hormone metabolism and the microbiome and metabolic health. As a founder of the CEO of Living Well Dallas, she focuses on root cause resolutions for issues like IBS and weight loss resistance. Dr. Murray also hosts the Menopause Mastery podcast and the television show Powering Through Menopause on the CW, sharing evidence-based strategies for long-term health and wellness. So that's a lot. That's a mouthful. And I feel like, oh my gosh, where have you been all our lives? And we're so glad you're here because I want to talk a little bit about how you got here, obviously, for the women who are listening, because this is about women in transition and women trying to find themselves. And I think because of the timing of when we are trying to find ourselves, right? It's usually a little bit after our 40s for some of us, right? That are making a career shift or waking up after having kids and being like, who the hell am I? And where's my identity? I think that just is a perfect intersection to the whole perimenopause and menopause crossfire that we're going to talk about. So tell me a little bit about, or tell us all a little bit about how you got to here. Where were you before and how you got to here? Because this is a lot.
Oh yeah, it's a lot. And, and I've also launched a femtech and telemedicine company too. So, reinvention, I would say reinvention has been a big part of my life for a long time. So oddly enough, when I went to college, right, I went to college and I was equally as interested in medicine and business at the same time. I was pre-med, science major, but I was also working full time and going to school full time. Like I had to pay for every dime of going to school. And it was the 80s. And so there was a part of me also that was like, do I really want to be in school 12 years? you know? And I had these competing interests, and so what essentially happened was I kind of backed up and said, okay, I'm going to come out with a business degree because I was really having a hard time financially seeing that picture, which I think a lot of people do when we're looking at reinvention, right? So I backed up and kind of went what I would say probably an easier way out, and went into sales and marketing and moved all over the country and ended up being an area manager in Chicago, immensely unhappy at what I was doing, and moved back to Texas, had a starter marriage. If anybody had one of those that you kind of just like a starter home, you keep for a little while and then you immediately unload. And when I got back to Texas, I had kind of the first reckoning, like, I don't want to do what I'm doing anymore. I'm highly technical. So I was the kid that would take things apart and my dad was an engineer. And so I was very good at science or just technical things, not math. Let me just be clear. So I looked at the PA program and everything else, and I'd taken the debt from the marriage and, bought a house here. And so I was kind of put myself into the same situation where I didn't have as much freedom as I might have needed to really reinvent. But while I was working for the company that I was working for, it was in the early part of the technology boom. So anybody that's my age can remember the dial-up days. And I got swept into that technology boom. So I ended up going back to school and getting, educated in basically, computer science, all kinds of certifications, ended up, getting hired to the company I worked for 11 years, reporting to the CTO because I had a unique set of skills that I understood the business and now I understood the tech. And I was the first woman hired into that group. I worked 100 hours a week. I had more responsibility than my male counterparts, and I was getting paid at least half, if not less than that, than my counterparts. With the expectation, of course, you should deal with that because you have the soft skills and the hard skills, but I didn't write code. And while I was doing that, I had a digestive problem that would come and go when I was younger, but you kind of overlook it and you're like, oh, I had beer and pizza in college and that's why I feel bad. And it became a lot more pronounced, probably because of the stress. And when I went to the gastroenterologist to get diagnosed to see what was going on, he diagnosed me with colitis. And I asked the question, could it be what I'm eating? And this is in classic kind of rude, misogynistic male medicine, he leaned forward and laughed in my face and said it had nothing to do with what I ate. And I was like, well, that's interesting because, if I don't eat, it starts to get better. I was like, obviously there's inputs going in there with food. So I kind of just went around behind that and said, okay, I'm going to stay in the corporate America. I'm going to go back to school and see if I can learn what's going on. So I started taking classes and moved into a master's program and a certification program. And when I got into biochemistry, I was like, oh, this is really where I'm supposed to be. Like nutrition is what I read about, and it was kind of what I did in my free time. But it really clicked. And so I went back and did that while I sat in that corporate world, right? I still worked, I still traveled, I still grounded out while I was there. And then when I finished the master's program and the certification, I was like, okay, I'm going to hang my shingle. So I started the side hustle, right? I hung my shingle and I worked predominantly with women dealing with digestive problems and autoimmune conditions because that was my experience, right? And it was really evident very quickly, like if you start looking at the research, women suffer from chronic disease at a level men can't even fathom, right? It's women autoimmune 10 to 1. We have more likelihood to have a longer health span and poorer health than men. We're more likely to die from cardiovascular disease than men, even having a heart attack. And I was like, wait a minute, like this is all hormonal. Obviously, we're very different and women don't get studied. And so Living Well Dallas was born out of that. So I built a clinic that was integrative with a partner and then took it over, about a decade ago. And and then, we started kind of building these frameworks that now have become Minerva, which is a telemedicine company and technology platform that we provide these kind of services across all 50 states. But in my late 40s, I was like, there's not enough research here. I don't understand where the missing pieces are because my perimenopause and menopause was really crappy, despite being highly plugged in. I know all the functional medicine luminaries, all the New York Times bestsellers. I could have easily speed dialed most of those and been like, what do I need to do? And I was still having a horrible menopausal experience. So I went back at 49 to get my PhD, knocked out another master's because, if you don't finish the paper, you get nothing but the bill. So I got a second master's and a PhD, and I focused on hormone metabolism. So how our body processes hormones and its interaction in the microbiome. And I specifically, my dissertation looked at, women with IBS while I was still working. So I was CEO of a company, still seeing patients, doing that. And then Minerva was really born out of that experience. And so, while I was kind of working on my dissertation, I got kind of bored with that. And I was like, I need to fiddle fart over here. So I think on two parts. Number one, I have a unique set of skills because I'm weird. I was like in sales, running stores, and then tech, and then now in healthcare. But the other side of it, at the very underpinning of everything I've ever done, was a reinvention. And it was always because I ran into just sort of a clustering of experiences and feelings inside that I was meant for something different, not in this astronomical, egotistical sort of way, but that there was this other sort of knowing that was there, that it was like time to shift, right? Time to shift. And in many cases, kill off that identity and go create a new identity. But every single time it has become closer and closer to who I want to be, what I want to do, the things I want to talk about. So it's kind of interesting. But I think for me, the biggest part was being okay with what I chose over here is no longer fitting. Right. And the funny thing, Adarita, I spent more time and more money in school than if I'd just gone to med school.
I know, I know. I'm listening to this. Like you resisted that in the beginning and went all this other. But you know what? You picked up those skills that are probably serving you now, anyways, and you went the route you were supposed to go.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, the universe unfolds and happens for you, not to you. It's just funny, like because hindsight, I think a lot of times trap people because it's like, oh, I have sunk cost. Oh, I've already done that. Oh, it's too late. Oh, but what are people going to think? That's the beauty of menopause. We just don't care anymore. Don't care.
So, what was the exact turning point that you started like feeling that there needed to be a shift? I mean, you had a couple of different pivots. So,
Yeah, every single time there was a pivot. And I think what it was a combination of things, like even if you look at history was never just a series of events. It was the socioeconomic, it was the climate of the time, who was being oppressed and not oppressed, and all of that. Like those things happen. And I think we run into those things in our life. I think we have a situation where maybe we're in a role or in a position that no longer serves us, no longer is serving even the people we might work for, right? Like I had become actively subversive in my organization because I was like, they're stupid, they don't know what they're doing, I don't want to be here. And so I wasn't like trying to damage it, but I was also not engaging at the level I should be. But at the same time, right, at the same time, parts of my personal life are not working well either. Like it felt like everything was spiraling a little bit at every single pivot point. And of course you could look at it and go, well, was it the work that did it? Was it this? Was it that? And when I was younger, I would have said, I would have been like, oh, it's the job. It's the company I work for. It's the this, it's the that. Well, at one point I changed from one company to another doing the exact same role and it still sucked in my estimation. And so I think sometimes that pivot requirement, it's like if you don't listen to the niggling and the inner, it all of a sudden it's going to express itself outwardly, and then all of a sudden it's going to be like, oh, I'm losing friendships, oh, my relationship's falling apart, oh, my finances are falling apart. Like they're like I knew it internally, and the longer I tried to hold on to the old, the more things started to spiral outside of it. And so I've just learned, now at this point, 56 going on 57, like when the niggling happens, pay attention. Although I've been doing what I do for 22 years and I love talking about it and I'm not going away, but I have pivoted even recently about how that's getting done and what, you know.
so there are women who are here listening and they're at a point where they feel totally lost in their own body or in a major life transition that they're trying to get through or even open the door to, just having the courage to do that. What is the very first step to finding the root cause of, this niggling that you're talking about? How do we even wake up to that and say, okay, let me dig deeper?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because if we look at, because a lot of women, like you said, are in this kind of perimenopause, menopausal time period, which for most people can be, early as your late 30s, like mine started really in my late 30s, but generally like 40 to 52, 53 is usually where that transition occurs. We have to recognize that that is a massive body-wide biological event. Right? The ovaries are running out of eggs. The production of your sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, is declining, if not bungee cord jumping before they finally fall out. And every single cell in our body is affected by that. And so often what happens is we feel completely different. Our metabolism changes, our mood changes, our brain becomes foggy, we can't sleep, we have insomnia, we exercise and don't recover from it, or we exercise and we're like, this is punishment because nothing is happening. Hot flashes and night sweats, maybe we get those, but they're often kind of late in the game. Most of the symptoms are anxiety, depression, brain fog, and fatigue. Those are the biggest early predictors. And so this same transition comes along at a time where many of us, I don't have children, but our kids might be grown or in that where they don't need you constantly zone, right? They might be tweens or teens or empty nesting. And so part of our identity and where we spent, a significant portion of our non-professional lives in the second job was managing them. So now you're like, okay, I don't know who I am without this requirement every day. And then if we're partnered, a lot of times with the partner, we've spent 20 years talking about the kids and managing the kids, and we don't even know each other anymore because you started growing in different ways. And like all of this culminates. And then as a woman, you sit here and you go, I don't even know who I am anymore. Like my body feels weird. I don't recognize myself and I don't feel right. Um, and I look at it from biochemistry standpoint. Yes, menopause is natural, but surviving 2 to 3 to 4 decades afterwards is not. Our lifespan in 1900 was 48 years old on average. Now, if you took mortality during childbirth out of that, we got to the like middle 50s. So we didn't exist for decades afterwards. So we didn't have a lot of choices outside of that. So we're unprecedented. And what's really happening later on in the brain is remodeling. It's in it over about 10 to 15 years, it sort of pushes back into these more creative and intuition based areas of our brain. And so all of those things to me are kind of both the sort of quantum signal, the biological signal for us to go internal and look at what does this next time period need to be. And then we look at it from a biological standpoint and medical standpoint, saying, if hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone protect us from all causes of dying, and we know that research is clear, right? Especially if they're started in that transition period and continued, our likelihood of getting dementia and Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease, stroke, breast cancer, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, all of those are diminished. Not completely taken off the table, but you actually are protected. Hormone replacement therapy helps put back what's changing our brain and everything else, because it is literally changing your brain, your metabolism, your bones, your heart, your vascular system. And so what we often come at this with is, let's get your biochemistry working properly so you can feel right, just right, to then go, what does my life want to, what do I want the next couple decades to look like? What do I want to spend my time doing? Because I think most of us at this point are like, I want it to mean something to me.
So it sounds like if we are in a position where we're trying to explore the next chapter, not only do we need to have the courage to open that door and pursue that, but if something is not right internally, if the insides are not producing the way they should be or producing what they should be, or if there's a decline, if there's perimenopause symptoms that are creeping up, we need to pay attention to that, because that's going to impact this external thing that we want to pursue next. Wow. So how would you say that, like, you specialize in the hormones and they dictate our reality? That's very clear. How do these massive physiological shifts actually alter the sense of personal identity?
Yeah.
It's almost like, yes, the internal is connected to the identity, but how is that going to, where is that connection happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a couple different things. I mean, I think it's definitely a chemical interaction. So, for instance, inside the brain, when estrogen starts to fluctuate wildly and then decline, which is what it's doing during perimenopause and menopause, we literally see a remapping of your brain neurons. So, think of those as superhighways. So, there's superhighways, and the more highways we have connecting to like the prefrontal cortex, that's your deep thought, that's your critical executive function, that's your math, that's your problem solving. What happens is, with the loss of estrogen, those highways pop loose, right? So they start pulling back. So imagine it's kind of like the highways are damaged during a hurricane and they're not getting rebuilt. And we also see a down regulation of energy production, right? So all of a sudden, all the powerhouses in the brain start to dim. And so I always think of it when we look at identity, identity often starts as an intellectual pursuit, right? Who am I? What do I do? Right? Like, like we always thought men do that, but we do it too. I'm Betty. I'm this person. This is who I did as a career. I'm a mom. I'm a this. And it starts as an intellectual pursuit. Well, as an intellectual pursuit, if my brain is running on half gear, right, and it's slowing and it's changing its function, and I don't feel sharp here, a lot of times we'll stop and sort of get stymied on that intellectual pursuit because we don't feel like it's firing, right? But then I think the other part of it is, I think it is the beauty of this transition, and what's really happening is, there's mammals there's are very few mammals that live through menopause, right? So almost all mammals die after fertility. So when their eggs run out, they're gone. The ones that do, orcas and a few whales, right? A few whales, they survive significantly long after fertility. What's interesting, if you watch them in nature, the entire tribe, whether it's orcas together or pod, I guess you would call orcas, or whales, actually are controlled and dominated by the matriarch. They are entirely matriarchal, right? So I think the other part of it is there is a reason why we do this, and it's for us to shift into more of a wisdom sage experience. And I think there's a resistance that we get, particularly in the Western world, to that, because we also have a society that says, well, I remember somebody saying online that they thought Scarlett Johansson like 10 years ago was getting old. And I about, pardon me, lost my shit. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, right? Particularly in the United States, we live in an environment where youth is praised and women are invisible by now, right? And, I would say we're demanding different today. So like all those things come together with the biology and the changes and the fact that nature wants us to survive long after fertility for a reason. Right. And I think it's actually probably in some ways turning off some of those negative environmental things and just getting away from it. Right. If you spend an hour or two on Instagram, I promise in most cases, you're not going to feel fulfilled and excited about your life afterwards. Because either one of two things are going to happen. It's doom scrolling or you're going to see a lie. No one's on there like, look at my house completely blown up and it's terrible and nothing's working. It's very rare, right? And so I think a lot of it is sitting in that and recognizing all those pieces coming together.
So, through your platform, you tackle this unglamorous reality of menopause. How do we start normalizing this messy middle we're in when, like, the physical parts of finding ourselves again is so hard?
The messy middle, obviously, I obviously take a pretty strong scientific bend. Like if you're feeling off, you need help. Like this is where, often the OB-GYN that you worked with when you had a baby and stuff is probably not the person you need to work with here, because you need somebody literate in how to treat a perimenopause and menopausal woman. Only 20% of medical schools even have an hour of training for menopause, which is a good 30, 40 years of our life. And so I would say there's that, but I think the other part of sort of gravitating in this zone is also looking at, how do you get your answers, right? So one of the things that is powerful is women with women, right? And we have so many things about advocating for ourselves today. Like we're losing ground, without getting political, we are losing control and ground of being seen as equal, right? Particularly in the United States. And so I think there's also this understanding that we have agency over our own life and our own experience, and that especially when we're in community with women, we feel more empowered because we have this shared experience. Because almost always in the 22 years of clinical practice, and I don't see patients anymore, but especially our physicians and our other nutritionists, you would be talking to a woman, she's like, well, I want to tell you this story, and she thinks she's the only one having it. And the reality is we're all having it. And only when we're around women that we trust and that are on this journey with us do we recognize that this is a shared experience and it is a shared opportunity for us to change it. And I think it's also being able to advocate, right? Is to be able to say, hey, I'm not getting what I need, whether it's a medical experience, experience with my profession, or experience with my family. It's learning how to do that. And in some cases, it's like boundary flexing. It's all of those pieces. And I think the big part of that is, for me, that was big. Like I looked up in my middle 40s and I was like, oh my God, the only people I spend time with are associates, right? They're people I know from a business standpoint, but not from a shared experience standpoint where we're all trying to work together and have a better life, which is where like masterminds and women's groups really come in. And so I completely sort of rearranged my life so I would be around other women that were looking for the experience I was looking for too, because I think you never know what other people have gone through and where they're going until you're in community with them. And I think that's also really, really important about, okay, my body feels weird and I don't know what to do here, but if I stay with myself and I just try to intellectualize it, I probably won't get moving, right? It's often in that community that we get moving.
Right. So while we're experiencing this brain fog and are in this heavy exhaustion, which makes it very hard to think. So if we're making pivotal shifts and big decisions, but there's this brain fog, there's this exhaustion. How do you physically find the energy, or what do you tell a woman? How do we navigate through that to then be able to make the pivot and not make mistakes?
Yeah, I think this is where getting tested, getting hormones, getting your body biologically kind of back on track, because again, our bodies are doing what they do. It's just we weren't designed to live a long time afterwards. We really weren't. And there are a lot of people out there that go, oh, you have to earn your hormones, you got to work out, you got to eat all your protein, you got to take your creatine, all this stuff. Like, we get all these messages online, you need to do all these things first. Well, it's been my experience clinically, and especially, even with a telemedicine company, that often it's almost impossible to do a lot of those things consistently because, again, we're tired, our brain doesn't work, we're not sleeping, we're about ready to kill everybody in our vicinity because our anxiety is up to here. And so this is where having lab testing, looking at where you are, whether you're perimenopausal or menopausal, and actually acknowledging that many, many women, I don't think every woman needs to go on hormones, but I think every woman, regardless of age, deserves the right to explore that for them. And the vast majority are going to benefit from it. Because when you bring the biology back to balance, right? When I have enough estrogen and progesterone to sleep at night, when I have enough testosterone to have that anticipation and motivation that is driven by dopamine and testosterone, when I'm not having crime scene periods and all those other things, I all of a sudden now feel like I used to, right? Like, where my brain was a little sharper and all those other things. And what feels overwhelming is no longer overwhelming. And then I'm able to examine a new thing. We did a survey of 57,000 women over 18 months. 71% of the women surveyed had a culmination of three things. They've Definitely, women are always worried about weight gain, right? If we look at the diet industry, we know that's it. Like, my body's not, it's doing things with the weight, but 71% overwhelmed and stressed out. 71% of women described their life not as, I feel stressed some of the time. Like, we had varying degrees. It was overwhelmed and completely stressed out, right? That makes it very difficult to look at your life and go, let's reimagine. It's like somebody doing jazz hands at you. You're like, shut up, right? Right. And I look at it and I go, if restoring hormonal balance and also making sure it's not a hidden thyroid problem, not a hidden adrenal cortisol stress problem, if I can balance that chemistry out so you have a working brain and working energy, and you can get recovery and you have enough energy to maybe do a little bit of exercise and decide to eat better, because you're not going to do any of those things if you don't feel good, right? You're not. It's like you're up against a wall. That now allows you to start imagining something different. And I think, if we look at the stats right now, it's between 4 and 7% of women who are in the age range where we know they have the best outcome if they start hormones and continue them. 4 to 7% of women eligible are actually on hormone replacement. It's a huge gap because they've been told a lie.
So let's go into the lie a little bit, because I grew up with the lie, right? Like, so if I am considering it, or if she's considering it, but then has this inner voice that says, well, you're introducing things to your body that are not natural, not normal. Just let it be, ride it out, and it'll pass. The storm will pass and everything will be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because if you had talked to me like 15 years ago, when I came out of school for nutrition, it was complete arrogance on my part. It's naivete and arrogance. I was like, I'm gonna, do this naturally. I can do it with herbs and nutrition. I'm gonna balance my hormones naturally. You cannot, believe me, I've tried. And you can formulate supplements, you can do all these things. You cannot restore ovarian function with lifestyle. You cannot restore ovarian function with herbs. You can maybe blunt a little bit of the symptoms, but I walked into that kind of doing that until I was in the throes of it. And then I was in the science of it. And I'm like, hold on a minute, right? Like this is completely different. And so, you know, if we look at that, yes, it's a completely natural thing, but again, it's not natural to live long past it. And so the myth really comes from one study, right? So, number one, we have to know that we've been replacing estrogen, and we actually started testing and doing studies on testosterone in Europe, not in the US, in the 1940s. Estrogen replacement therapy was available in the 1930s and 40s for women. And at one point in the 80s and 90s, it rivaled statins for the number of prescription. It was standard of care for women. If you came in and said, I had brain fog, I had some hot flashes and night sweats, they gave it out like candy, no questions asked. Kind of like how we do birth control today, right? So, so women for decades were on hormones. Now, we have to understand that in 1993, we had passed legislation to require women being included in studies. And still to this day, only 2% of studies are actually funded for women, right? We had to legislate that because prior to that, it was like, we don't want women in our study because they knew, number one, our chemistry would change their outcome. Number two, they felt that we were incapable of handling the rigors of studies. So in 1997, for the first time, we had a woman running the research institution. And so they started the Women's Health Initiative. And so the Women's Health Initiative was the first women's study, and it was designed to study basically one area. If hormone replacement therapy in the form of a drug called Premarin, which is, oral conjugated equine estrogen, so that's horse pee, that's what it's made from, or Premarin with a thing called medroxyprogestin, which is a synthetic, not bioidentical form of progestin, right? So kind of synthetic form of hormone, or nothing at all. And what they were looking at is, would it reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke in women? They enrolled over 16,000 women. But here's the challenge. To do that study correctly, they should start with women in their 40s and 50s and follow them till the end, which is a 30 or 40-year adventure, which would have been billions of dollars. Couldn't do that. So what they did is they enrolled women, and the vast majority of women were 10 to 11 years on average past menopause. Now, the other part was this: they significantly were overweight. So 50% were obese or overweight. Almost 50% were smokers and or previous smokers, but most of them were still smokers. And they had high cholesterol, they had hypertension. These were high risk women to begin with. And part of it is because they only wanted to run it for about 7 years. And so what they needed was something to happen to some of them so they could assess between these three groups what was different. Well, they start the study, and a couple years in, the group that was on Prempro, synthetic progestins and estrogen, had an increased risk of stroke, right? So they halted the study because it's no longer ethical to have women in the study because you can't keep that arm going. Now, that was really important because it was the first time we had seen it. Now, when they started looking at the data, there was a subgroup of people. This is multiple clinics, multiple, all across the country. There was a subgroup of people that were researchers in it that had decided before the study started, they wanted to get rid of, and I'm quoting, the runaway train of hormone replacement therapy for women. That was their bias. So while they were going through peer review, and peer review is when somebody else that's not associated with the study checks your math, right? Checks your work, make sure that it's sufficient and appropriate. While it was in peer review, this subgroup went digging for data that was not part of the study. And what they found, digging for data, was that at that time, the women who did nothing at all had a 3 in 1,000 chance of getting breast cancer over that time period. The women that were in the Prempro arm had a 4 in 1,000 chance. Now, you and I have to do math. Is that even meaningful? No. But here's what they did. They called a press conference, which we've never done before and have never done since, and ran it to the media before it got peer reviewed and published that it was a 26% increase in breast cancer risk, because a 3 to a 4 is a 26% increase, but it wasn't statistically significant. And here's the data that didn't make it, and it never made it out into the market. The women who were on Premarin alone had a 23% reduced risk compared to the women who had nothing at all. And overnight, women were taken off of hormones. The black box warning was put on it. Residents and medical professionals were taught that it kills you. And this was where the world ran. Now, the reality is we had lots of studies before that, and never before had we had any relationship that estrogen caused breast cancer. And literally to this date, we only have a couple studies that show when you pack on Premarin on top of tamoxifen, you might get an increased risk of metastatic activity, but even that's equivocal. Sometimes it shows it, sometimes it doesn't. The treatment for estrogen sensitive cancers until some of the more recent chemotherapy, so all the way through the 80s, was high dose estrogen. So we've been told that if we took hormones, we were going to get breast cancer. And what never made sense to me, because I'm a logical person, I'm like, we hand out birth control, which is synthetic estrogens that irreversibly bind to your receptors. So your body thinks it's in menopause, so you don't ovulate. We hand that out like candy to people with no question. And they are by far stronger and more powerful than your own hormones. And something magical happens at 50 when you hit menopause-ish, right? That the hormones your body make is now going to kill you. I'm like, oh, that defies logic, right? But the risk for estrogen sensitive cancers increases as you get older. So the average age of diagnosis for breast cancer is 62 in the United States. And it's gone up in the last 20 years, not just because we're better at catching it. We actually have seen a huge increase in breast cancer. And the one thing we see is that women were not on hormones in that age group. So we've been barking up the wrong tree. We have terrorized women. And now we have an entire population of boomers that have low bone density, increased vascular disease, risk for Alzheimer's. That is it increases our risk between 34 and 54% between studies, right? So like if you're worried about Alzheimer's, that's a big deal, right? Estrogen has the strongest correlation of being protective. And here's the thing about breast cancer. The biggest risks we have our alcohol consumption is anywhere between 13 and 17% increased risk for breast cancer. Obesity, overweight, having extra body fat increases yours between your teens all the way into your 20s, percentage, right? By far greater than any assumption we ever made about hormone replacement therapy. And so women get told that. So they don't do hormones, which can help the metabolic picture, which can help all the other risks. And they're terrified that they're going to get breast cancer. When we get to about 80, we have a 1 in 8 chance, all women, because the spelling errors in our DNA as your body's replacing cells have more errors. But the hormones that we're doing, the bioidentical, which means they're chemically exactly like the hormones our body makes, restore metabolic function and cellular function. And they're not at the doses you were doing at 20. They're at the doses that are physiological to protect our body. But it's not taking you back to having a cycle. And we've been just told a lie. And most women should be pissed, right? I'm pissed, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, we have to undo that. And it's like I could hear my mom in my ear, I could hear my aunts in my ear, like, don't take anything. This is natural. We've gone through it. We've been through it. Look at us. We're still here and everything's okay and it passes. But it's like, okay, so basically what I'm hearing you say is not taking hormone replacement therapy could even do further damage than the paranoia story or the lie about the damage it's going to do.
Yeah. I mean, estrogen, so especially, I'm just going to focus primarily on estrogen because that's the one that's been demonized. But estrogen helps build bone. Progesterone also does, but it helps build bone. So it's literally the foreman of bone building. So when you go through menopause, I don't care who you are, if you are not actively working on building bone, like lifting heavy, eating right, all that stuff, you are likely losing bone, even if you're doing those things, because the loss of estrogen just basically tells the construction crew to blow that off, right? And the demolition crew works overtime. If we look at the vascular system, the heart and blood vessels, estrogen acts as an anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and it stimulates the heart muscle. So when we lose that, everything hardens, everything starts to plaque. We start to get what they call microvascular disease. So we lose blood flow to the brain and the heart. We don't present like men with heart attack and stroke, but we have a greater risk for it. And we age match men for risk within 10 years. We're protected until menopause, and then we catch up really fast. And then if we look at that Alzheimer's dementia, right, especially Alzheimer's, 3 out of 4 Alzheimer's patients are women. And we clearly know that estrogen is protective to the brain, particularly if it started in that first like 10-year window of menopause, right? Because that's when the brain's going through all these changes. And we have imaging showing that the brain doesn't do those changes if we have hormones on board. And if anybody wants to really dig into this, there's a book called Estrogen Matters by Dr. Avram Blooming and Carol Tavris. I would recommend listening to it on Audible. It's a little dry to read. It's every study that's ever been published about hormone replacement and its protective effect with estrogen. And it was recently updated in 2024. Now, you have to remember that most of the studies were done up until just recently on Premarin, right? We don't use that anymore. We don't take horsemare urine. But there's a lot of studies that have come out in the last few years with the topical bioidentical hormones showing protection. And and I think it's just, you have to almost get over the wives' tale. It's this dogma that's got to die. And unfortunately, still medical professionals say it all the time. Every day we get some dumb recommendation or snide remark that we hear from a patient that is completely inaccurate.
Wow. My mind is just blown. Like how we are where we are and still living with this lie and nobody knows. And I'm like,
If this were men, if men had to go through the pain of even a pap smear, right? Breast examination, any of that, it wouldn't exist. It wouldn't exist. We would have hormones in Pez dispensers in every gas station and bathroom in the world. We would find ways to do things without paying. We would respect women's pain when they say something is painful. The whole world would change. But misogyny is probably one of the strongest in this industry, just prevalent.
so wild. Is there a connection to healing our physical gut and us helping us like trust our emotional intuition again? Is there a connection there? You know,
Huge.
the gut instinct, right? Trust your gut, trust your instinct.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I said, my research also looked at kind of what hormones are doing in the gut, the relationship between the gut and particularly the microbiome and digestive function, among many other things. But we have what they call the gut brain axis. So the brain and the gut are connected, and we actually have another brain in the gut that's what they call the enteric nervous system that's actually larger and more pronounced than the stuff that we think of up here, right? In the brain. And it produces more chemistry that we associate with mood and memory and focus and all those other things in the gut than it does in the brain. So, for example, serotonin is supposed to be your kumbaya, feel good neurotransmitter. 95% of that comes from the gut, not your brain. And for every message we send from the brain to the gut, there's an average of 9 going back, right? And much of that is coming from our microbiome, right? So we have trillions of microbial cells in our gut. They belong there. We have more bacterial cells in our gut than we do human cells in our entire body. And you think of it as a garden, and that garden requires fertilization and health. And your garden either could have bunches of like woodland creatures and cute little bunnies and all that stuff, or it can have cockroaches and snakes. And so our digestive tract is ground zero for every disease and inflammatory condition. There's correlation across the board everywhere, all the way to Alzheimer's, all the way to cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, you know, hormones, all of it. And the reality is often we feel what we would call emotion in our gut first, right? So like how often does somebody feel anxious, but if they took a moment to feel the anxiety, that it actually starts, the sensation starts digestively, a tightening of the stomach, a shortening of the breath, a feeling of like the gut pulling in, maybe even bloating, you know what I mean? And so at the same time, you're experiencing that. So, if you think of your gut as kind of the healing zone and your intuition rides between the brain and the gut, I like to think it kind of does, is the more I take care of my gut, the more my intuition can come forward, because intuition comes out of a subconscious mind, right? So if our gut's in fight or flight and we're stressed out and we're in sort of a chronic stress response, we're not in a parasympathetic response where we can really tap into the subconscious. And a lot of times, that's because there's other stuff going on in there. So we should never overlook digestive issues. But the really crazy thing is even people without obvious digestive issues often have issues. They just don't recognize it because they're not having outward focus. So almost always we're sort of looking at how do we make that garden we have in there and all the little bugs that are in there healthier, because it makes everything else healthier. But emotional state and connection to self has such a strong correlation there. Such a strong correlation. And it makes me think of one of our patients. She had come in, she'd been seeing all these doctors, she'd been put on all these antidepressants, and she kept telling him, she's like, no, no, no. She had IBS like symptoms. She's like, and she had anxiety attacks. Usually would happen in the middle of the night. And she's like, no, no, no. My gut would start first. She'd feel this cramping in her gut, these movement, this other stuff. Then the anxiety would kick in. And they were like, no, you're anxious, so therefore. And she's like, no, it's in the reverse order. And she didn't want to be on meds anymore and all this other stuff. So we worked with her. We started working on her gut. And lo and behold, there was a lot going on there. But when her gut got better, her anxiety went 100% away. Because she's like, no, this would start first. I feel all of this stuff. And then, half hour to an hour later, then I would get these panic attacks, but they were not on top of each other. I wasn't panicking first, and therefore the gut was now reacting. It was in reverse order. And, it makes me think how many women get those kind of things, but then they're told it's that. Then they're like, oh, you need a benzodiazepine. Now you need an SSRI. Now you need something for sleep. Now you need, Linzess for your gut because you've got IBS or whatever they're telling you. Right.
So what's like one, I always say like these episodes are great. We can always binge on these episodes or listen to it and come back, but what can we take away? What is one simple habit that you would recommend for the woman who's listening to take away that she can apply right now this week to like get reconnected with her physical self again?
Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, it doesn't mean you have to take action today, but look at your care relationship with who's helping you as your partner in healthcare. And then I'm going to talk about some things that you can do that cost you nothing. If they're not the right person here, start pulling your information together and start doing a little bit of research on what you're looking for, right? Because often who helped us give birth to our babies really can't help here because that's what they get paid to do. They don't want to talk to you about your symptoms, right?
Right.
And so I think it's really important. I think you really do need that partnership. Now, what are the things that we can do to take care of our physical body right here, right now, that really don't cost us anything? There are three things that I think of that are very, very important because they touch on all these different parts. So first and foremost, hydration, right? Our entire body is 70%, if not more, water, right? And if we are chronically dehydrated, all metabolic things do not work well, right? All the way down to your ability to burn fat and sugar. And so many of us think we're drinking water and we're not, right? And so hydration is really, really important. It's also important to the brain. And that's something that doesn't cost us anything. And it's more important to drink the water between meals than to pound water in meals. So what I tell people to do is like fill one of those like Stanley cups, and between breakfast and lunch, you want at least one of those. Between lunch and dinner, you want at least one of those. And ideally you want close to one of those when you wake up in the morning before you have coffee or anything else. Because that helps you make sure you're hydrated, right? Because that helps all metabolic things. And I can't even begin to tell you how many people are like, my brain doesn't feel as foggy. I'm like, because it's a dried out sponge. Not
Right.
really, but it's a good visual, right?
Right.
Number two, fiber, right? Fiber in your diet, coming from fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains. You can supplement with fiber, but it's not the same as eating it, right? We have science that shows supplemental fiber can help, but you can't take 30 grams of fiber in a supplement and get the same output as actually eating fruits and vegetables. But fiber is really important for multiple things. It feeds your good microbiome, right? So if our microbes have significant control over our body, regardless of symptoms, making sure they're well fed so you grow the right ones, right? So think of it as your probiotics grow from lots of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, polyphenols, and the fiber. Right? If I don't feed them, I get cockroaches and snakes growing. That is 100% clear. I don't care what anybody online says. That is 100% clear. Why this is important. Fiber helps bind to cholesterol, helps bind to estrogen and estrogen-like toxins coming out in the gut. Fiber also helps improve insulin resistance, blood sugar control, and reducing post-eating sugar rises. It also reduces visceral fat in perimenopause and menopausal women on its own. Right. So all I have to do is start eating a little more fiber. My goal is 30 to 35 grams. If you're eating the average 8, which is what Americans do, don't go to 35 overnight. You're going to hate me because you're going to be like, I'm just gassy as all get out. Right. So add it slowly over time, but that goal is 30 to 35. Right. And then I would say the last thing is get physical movement. The one thing that we often do because we put everybody else first is we're like, okay, I'll get to my own body later. And
Yep.
later never gets here, right? And women benefit from two major areas. I'm going to focus on two, right? Intensity and short duration, right? So that's things like lifting heavy for you. That's progressive. And also even short bursts of intensity. There's a study that came out last week that a short 1 minute burst at all out intensity is equal to 100 to 150 minutes of walking. I don't know about you, but I'd rather do a minute,
Yeah.
knock it out. Right.
Yeah.
So get some physical movement. The other thing is that gives you a place for your stress chemistry to burn off. Right.
Mm,
Stress is here. It needs a physical outlet. Our body is an animal. It doesn't know that you're on your 8th Zoom call for the day. Right. It
right.
just knows my chemistry is showing me stress. Give it a physical outlet. The other thing that women benefit more from metabolically is what we call NEAT. So this is your general activity of living. Right. So this is moving around more. We need to move every day, whereas men can do like shorter bursts of things and get better metabolic effect. So this means walking is still valuable. Parking further away is still valuable. Getting up and doing air squats, like an air squat every hour, like 10 air squats, beats out walking 10,000 steps, right? So, but we need to move. And especially I would say outdoors, if you can get outdoors, sunlight, air, nature, that helps kind of free up the brain a little bit too. But those are all things you can do that'll cost you a dime, and put it on your schedule, right? Don't say I'm going to get to it at the end of the day, because you won't.
Right. If it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So hydrate, fiber, move. Simple.
Yeah.
Okay. So this was so packed with so much info. I feel like people may need to re-listen to this to digest some of it. If people want to find you, want to follow up with more and get into this a little bit deeper, where can we find you?
Yeah. So I have my podcast. It's called Menopause Mastery. It's on all podcast platforms and YouTube. So sometimes it's great to watch on YouTube because I might be showing diagrams. And then you can also find me at drbettymurray.com. And you can also, if you're curious about like what's going on in your hormones and you're kind of like, I think I'm in this zone, I don't really know, we have a quiz, and you can get to that quiz called quiz.gethormonesnow.com. And what that does, it's very short, it's easy to do, but it takes in some of your symptoms and other things that you're experiencing and sort of gives you an understanding of what hormones may be out of balance. Because the reality is it's never just one. It's never just perimenopause. It's stress, it's thyroid, it's other stuff. So it helps you kind of understand, and then you get personalized recommendations of how to deal with that.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for all the nuggets of knowledge and info and shattering the lie that we all heard here, in your time and your wisdom. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, until next time. That's a wrap on another episode of the Amrita Effect. Nothing is wrong with you. You are just in the middle of becoming. If this resonated with you, please share it and subscribe. And if you could, leave a review so this reaches more women who need it. Just take one small step forward, and I'll see you in the next episode.